May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be always acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. Well, good morning, All Saints Church, and happy Pride. Woo! It is always an honor and a privilege to step into this pulpit and bring a word as part of our Eucharistic celebration, and never more so than on this second Sunday in Pride Month, as we do our part to proclaim God's inclusive love for absolutely everyone from 132 North Euclid, while our siblings from around the diocese are gathering, even as we speak, to bring the same message to the annual LA Pride Parade on Hollywood Boulevard. Photos coming soon to a Facebook page near you. I want to begin this Pride Sunday sermon by invoking the theme of our centennial year, engaging our past and imagining our future, and start by looking back to 1996, the year I came out on the 4th of July in the National Cathedral. Thank you. But that's not the story I'm going to tell. You can ask me later, or you can actually Google it. The story I'm going to tell is the one about what happened when I came home from that experience and met with my then Bishop Fred Borsch to break the news to him. Now, as a quick aside, anyone who's ever gone through the coming out process has their own experience of how that rolled for them. But for me, the unifying feature was absolutely no one I came out to reacted with, "Oh my gosh, you're kidding." It was pretty much unanimously, "Oh my gosh, you finally figured that out." And that was true for Bishop Borsch. After listening to my story, he asked me two questions. How can I help, and how are your boys? And he helped me a lot, and my boys are fine. And then he told me this. He told me he believed the voices, stories, and experiences of gay and lesbian people were going to be a gift to the church because they were going to challenge the unexamined sexuality of most straight people. And while those weren't always going to be easy conversations to have, they were going to be critically important in order to heal the church of the homophobia that infected it and to liberate both the oppressed and those participating in the oppression, whether they knew it or not. And that includes, he added, smiling, old bishops like me. Well, I actually turned 70 tomorrow, and what I realize is that old bishop was younger than me when he told me that, which is a sobering thought. And so on this Pride Sunday morning at All Saints Church, I look back today at how far we've come since that July 1996 afternoon in the bishop's office, deeply aware of how much we have yet to do to finish the work of healing and liberation, and at the same time, profoundly grateful for how far we've come, even though it has been a journey which included plenty of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And since we're also on final countdown to the 81st General Convention of the Episcopal Church in Louisville the week after next, I'm remembering many of the ghosts of General Conventions past. 24 years ago, I'm going to go off script for a minute. 24 years ago, I met Mike Kinman at General Convention in Denver when he stowed away in a Subaru full of lesbians to go listen to the Indigo Girls at Red Rocks. How's that for a cute meat story? But 24 years ago, as we were preparing to head off to that 2000 General Convention in Denver, we were assaulted from all sides by those who thought we were moving too fast and were going to split the church, and by those who thought we weren't moving fast enough and were planning to come and chain themselves to the convention hall doors in protest. by those who were telling the clergy who were planning to vest and process at the Integrity LGBTQ Eucharist that it would be the end of our careers in the church, and by those who were convinced that the very fact that there was going to be an Integrity Eucharist at the Denver Cathedral was the end of the church as we know it. We were a church polarized and divided, and that polarization and division was being fed, watered, and fertilized by a cohort of folks who had lost the battle to stave off the ordination of women and were losing the battle to impose what they called biblical orthodoxy on the Episcopal Church, fomenting that polarization by insisting that our differences were irreconcilable and that they alone had sole possession of the absolute truth. It was not the best of times. Nevertheless, we persisted. And this morning, as we prepare to head to Louisville to take our place in the councils of the church, we count 6 queer bishops in our House of Bishops. We have a task force on LGBTQ inclusion as one of our official interim bodies. And just last week, the Episcopal Church Communication Office introduced this official pride shield with a press release that included these words, and I quote, "In affirmation and celebration of the Episcopal Church's LGBTQ plus members." I can get a little verklempt just thinking about it. And I literally did not think I would live this long. Which does not mean we are done, which does not mean there is not yet work to do, and certainly does not mean we can risk underestimating the forces at work in our world, marshaling their resources to push back the gains towards full inclusion in our church, our nation, and our world for LGBTQ people. Nevertheless, as the inimitable George Regas of blessed memory taught us, the way we're going to get where we're going is the same way we've gotten as far as we've come. And that is by setting audacious goals and celebrating incremental victories. And the way we're going to get there is together. Together as beloved community, created in beautiful diversity, intended by God in her infinite wisdom to complete each other, not to compete with each other. That idea of complete, not compete, has been echoing in my head ever since I heard Sally say it in her sermon 2 weeks ago. And anybody who's ever spent any time at all listening to or preaching sermons knows that anything that gets remembered after coffee hour gets extra credit. So something that's preaching 2 weeks later is clearly an A+. And this morning, I'm thinking about it in the context of our first reading from the book of Genesis, which is, of course, the oft-told story of a man and a woman and an apple in a garden. A story that the church has used for generations to explain what it is called the doctrine of original sin. What I've come to wonder, after decades of reading and rereading the text Kathy read this morning, is if the original sin it recounts has less to do with disobeying God, which I am not arguing is a good idea, and more to do with the first thing that happened after disobeying God, and that was Adam throwing Eve under the bus. What I've come to wonder is whether the act of othering a human sibling, the rejection of the Garden of Eden ideal that we're created to complete each other, not compete with each other, is as old as Genesis and the prophets, and as new as whatever's happening over on whatever social media they're cooking up now to replace Twitter. What I've come to believe is that what happened under that apple tree is absolutely an original sin if we understand sin as that which separates us from the God who is the source of love that calls us to love our neighbors as ourselves, absolutely all our neighbors. During this Pride Month, we have the gift, the opportunity, and the challenge of offering the good news of God's inclusive love to members of the LGBTQ+ community as an antidote to the toxic, homophobic, and transphobic theology that has been weaponized against them. That, my brothers and sisters and gender-fluid siblings, is a high and holy calling. And one of the tools we have to offer that witness here at All Saints is a series of FAQs about Jesus, the Bible, and LGBTQ people, which has been evolving over the last decade or so. This year, in response to the escalated assault on our transgender siblings, we added this new Q&A to the list. Question: what do you say to someone who defends their anti-trans theology by saying, God doesn't make mistakes? Answer: God doesn't make mistakes, but we do. And we make a mistake when we project our own narrow, binary understanding of gender onto the complex, beautifully diverse continuum of humanity God created, and we're still learning to understand. It's the same mistake we make whenever we project our own finite knowledge onto God's infinite creativity and capacity to love. It's the first mistake human beings made in the Garden of Eden, and it's a mistake God had a response to in one of our most ancient scriptural texts, Job 38:2. Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? God doesn't make mistakes. We do. So let's not make the mistake of failing to fully embrace our transgender, non-binary siblings wherever they fall on the continuum of gender identity. My sisters and brothers and gender-fluid siblings, this is the essence of the collective human cosmic journey we all travel together, the journey beyond anything that separates us from each other to the destination of becoming the beloved community God created us to be, where there is no stranger left at the gate, and every single human being knows that they are loved beyond their wildest imagining by the God who created them in love, in order to walk in love with each other. It is a destination that evokes the words of Joni Mitchell, who made them famous as we journey to get ourselves back to the garden. Before the original sin of "the woman made me do it" turns us into creatures striving to compete with each other rather than complete each other. And one of the ways God has given us to get back to the garden is the gift of the Spirit we celebrated on the Feast of Pentecost. The Spirit our brother Bishop Stephen Charleston evoked in the second reading this morning. The Spirit who is the maker of all things, who calls each and one of us to share her image, not to be complacent, not to sit idle in the heart of change, but to take up our tools and make tomorrow happen. Not to sit idle in the heart of change. The tomorrow we are called to make happen is a tomorrow of love, justice, and compassion, a tomorrow in alignment with the values of the God who created us in love and then loved us enough to become one of us, to show us how to love one another, and has been calling to us since the beginning of creation. It is a tomorrow that can seem an impossible dream because of all the yesterdays piled up behind us, with the narratives of oppression, domination, and marginalization we not only inherit, but continue to inhabit. And it is a tomorrow which the devotees of the myth of redemptive violence are working overtime to keep us from moving toward by turning back the clock and sending us instead in exactly the opposite direction, toward a dystopian tomorrow of hatred, judgment, and absolutism, fueled by the condemnation of anyone who is other. These are not the best of times. Nevertheless, we persist. We persist because, like a GPS connected to a satellite that keeps us on course as long as it is plugged in, we are guided on our journey forward, trusting it's our connection to the love of God which will keep us on course if we stay plugged in and if we keep our own lives in alignment with God's justice, love, and compassion, that we can be the change we want to see in this beautiful and broken world. And what keeps us in that alignment, what keeps our spiritual GPS charged and connected to that satellite, is community. So it is to this place that we come, as generations of the All Saints faithful have come over these last 100 years we celebrate in this centennial year. It is to this place that we come to remember both that we are loved and that we're called to walk in love. And it is to this place that we come to be fed and fueled in order to get back out into the world and witness to that love, to partner with the Spirit in building a tomorrow, calling the creation back to the garden. Do this in remembrance of me, we will say in just a few moments as we gather around this table to share the bread and wine made holy. In remembrance of, to remember, to reverse our amnesia that we're loved by God, who created us in love, then called us to walk in love with each other, and who will at the end of this journey gather us all back into that love. That is the good news we both claim and proclaim here at 132 North Euclid, not just on Pride Sunday, but every time we gather as All Saints Church, as a community grounded and centered in the call of the Spirit to share in her image, not to be complacent, not to sit idle in the heart of change, but to take up our tools and make tomorrow happen together. And now won't you pray with me in words we've used before as we imagine that tomorrow, which is just over the horizon. God dwells in you. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, you can hear her breathing. She is on her way. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, you can hear her breathing. She is on her way. Amen.